Good afternoon, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to this week's post-cabinet media briefing. And we have addressing us today the Honorable Prime Minister, and I'll invite him immediately to the podium to address us. The Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley.
Thank you very much, members of the media. I am today wanting to address matters that occurred, or I should say a particular matter that visited us on the eve of Easter, and which we could not have comprehensively addressed during the Easter festivities. And today I'm in a position to respond to a lot of what was before us. Unfortunately, this is Trinidad and Tobago, and many persons who are in a position to interact with the media have no difficulty in jumping to positions without the requisite information. Even when they admit that they don't have the information, they would proceed beyond that point to make all kinds of statements and take positions which may be at variance with the facts. As head of the government, I do not have that luxury. I am required to be exercised by the facts, pleasant or unpleasant. Ladies and gentlemen, I refer specifically to the development with respect to the presentation of Trinidad and Tobago's position on Dominica's request for a waiver at the OAS meeting on the 23rd of March. Let me begin by saying that I, as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, was as shocked and embarrassed as any other citizen of this republic of ours. And I'm responsible for how the government portrays the people of Trinidad and Tobago outside our borders. And by government, I mean all those on the taxpayers' payroll. Permit me a moment to back up to where we started. When I took over this government of Trinidad and Tobago, it fell to the Prime Minister to appoint cabinet ministers and designate the scope and range of their portfolios. I designated a portfolio, foreign and CARICOM affairs. I'm not aware that this had happened before, but I took the position to emphasize that in Trinidad and Tobago, under my stewardship, under this administration, there will be focus on CARICOM, separate and apart from, but in step with our external relations. I appointed a very experienced, while not flamboyant, person in the position. Senator Minister Moses has served in the OAS at various levels for approximately 19 years and has served at ICA and other international bodies where Trinidad and Tobago is represented for a considerable period of time. So in Trinidad and Tobago, we do have a Minister of Foreign Affairs who is very experienced and who quietly gets his job done. We were experiencing a very unusually rough hurricane season last year. And in the middle of the night, I was contacted by the CARICOM Secretariat out of Guyana, indicating that Dominica was being battered beyond recognition and would need significant help from Trinidad and Tobago. Our country's position was and remains that regardless of what our circumstances are at home, we will always be able to share what little we have with those of our brothers and sisters in CARICOM who may be in greater need from time to time. And it's against that background that during that particular and fateful night, that by morning, we were able to report that we had helicopter assistance available in Dominica for search and rescue, and that we had a loaded vessel sailing to Roseau. That was Trinidad and Tobago's initial response, and it continued until we could do no more useful intervention. By September 23rd, Trinidad and Tobago's position was being made known to the world by the presentation of the foreign minister at the United Nations annual meeting, where Minister Moses, representing Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, spoke. And permit me to quote for you what our position was to the world at the United Nations, specifically to our Caribbean hurricane experiences. And he said, Trinidad and Tobago, which is the southernmost part of the Caribbean, was spared from the ravages of these hurricanes. It is with empathy that I extend on behalf of the government and people of Trinidad and Tobago heartfelt condolences to our Caribbean family. We are forever mindful that given our spirit of resilience, we will rebuild that which was lost. Trinidad and Tobago stands in solidarity and shall continue to assist with the relief efforts. However, rebuilding will require resources as well as the cooperation and collaboration of the international community, because we simply cannot do it alone, among other things which were said there. So that was Trinidad and Tobago speaking at the United Nations. Subsequently, there was a donor conference, and we were represented there at the United Nations headquarters by our permanent representative, Ambassador Penelope Beckles. And permit me again to quote Trinidad and Tobago's position as represented by its representative, speaking for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, authorized by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And Ambassador Beckles had this to say, and I quote, I quote selectively from her presentation, and she says, at the outset, on behalf of the government and people of Trinidad and Tobago, we continue to be deeply saddened by these events, and we will continue to stand in solidarity and support on the road to recovery and reconstruction. Together, we will all face the painful and irreparable loss of many lives and the widespread damage to homes and livelihood. She went on to say, therefore, Trinidad and Tobago also takes this opportunity in joining with others in expressing our delegation's appreciation to the United Nations and the CARICOM Secretary General for organizing this timely and necessary high-level donor conference to assist those countries affected by the tragic aftermath of Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Chairman, and she continues to say, as a member of the international community and a CARICOM member state, the government of Trinidad and Tobago mobilized resources and assistance to our brothers and sisters in Antigua and Barbuda and Dominica in the aftermath of the hurricanes Irma and Maria. Our government provided a helicopter and crew to provide relief and aid for Barbuda, including air support for search and rescues and evacuation of the island. The Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, in collaboration with our ODPM and partners, Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDIMA, identified persons who needed assistance. The Rapid Needs Assessment Team and an operational support team, and they went to work within the regional response mechanism and to support the conduct of initial damage assessments. In Trinidad and Tobago, a massive collective drive for relief items was promoted by the government in collaboration with the business sector and civil society. To date, speaking in November, a total of over 36 tons of relief supplies to our brothers and sisters in Dominica were on the way. 126 persons from Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, Coast Guard and Air Guard, as well as medical personnel were dispatched from Trinidad and Tobago to support the recovery efforts in Dominica. Our permanent representative at the UN went on to say, Mr. Chairman, it is known that Trinidad and Tobago is currently faced with difficult economic challenges. Notwithstanding this, when called upon, the government, but more importantly, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, has come together and has willingly donated food, water, medical supplies, and building materials. When our Caribbean brothers and sisters need us, we unequivocally answer. Our ambassador went on to say, in closing, the government of Trinidad and Tobago takes this opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to our CARICOM neighbors and our fullest support and solidarity as we continue together on this path towards resilience for a better and stronger Caribbean. That was the position and the policy of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. So for those who take it upon themselves to exercise themselves in speaking about the government of Trinidad and Tobago not having a policy with respect to these matters, I draw their attention to these internationally established and elucidated positions of our minister at the UN and our permanent rep at the UN on Trinidad and Tobago specific to this issue. There was a meeting, wasn't known to me because these things don't all get to the Prime Minister's desk, but we have structures in government to deal with them. But let me remind you that in seeking assistance for Dominica, over and above what I mentioned here in the words of our ambassador and our minister, I went as far as to invite the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to open their homes, and if they have Dominicans who they were in contact with, who they could support for a little while, to open their homes to Dominicans. And we took a decision at the level of the Minister of Education that our schools will be open to Dominican students if they make their way to Trinidad and Tobago. There were persons in Trinidad and Tobago who took objection to that and sought to make it a political issue. Persons in the opposition today who are trying to advise the government on what position it must take with Dominica. I simply want to remind you of what position this government took and the position that I took as Prime Minister and the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the wider populace. So it would be surprising to me, as it has been, that any person could claim not to know the level of empathy and commitment that the government of Trinidad and Tobago has made on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, specific to Dominica and its horrendous circumstances that they were coping with. Particularly office holders whose job it is to portray our country abroad, and those at home who support those who are abroad. It is surprising to me that there could be any person who didn't know what our position was. However, in the operations of the international business, there are structures and steps usually conducted in meetings, and there are lines of communication. And those lines of communications are clear and well established. So when I heard that Trinidad and Tobago had taken a position in opposition to the request of Dominica, it came as a shock to me, and I immediately inquired to find out how could this be and who was directing that policy, because clearly that was a change of policy that required an input from the political directorate. I asked for a comprehensive report from all levels where this matter would have been addressed, and a report from the minister who was responsible for this area of governmental activity. I have got those original documents from the various levels of our government, and it makes disturbing reading. Not for the first time, I have had to be concerned about certain actions taken by persons who may not have followed established procedures, or more, or worse, usurp the authority where that authority lies. The gist of what is before me in these documents, and let me just selectively, as I would, extract from some of the documents some of the lines that are contained in there, so you can get a picture of what confronted me when I got this report. This item, report of Deputy Director, Americas Division in the Foreign Affairs Ministry. One line in there says, on Friday morning, I wrote in the relevant file to the Permanent Secretary indicating that it was the view of the Americas Division that the request for a waiver from Dominica should be supported. This was transmitted to the Permanent Secretary on file. This Friday morning is Friday the 23rd of March. Let me draw to your attention that there was a meeting on the 15th of March of the OS where preparations for this Friday meeting took place. This is normal in these kinds of meetings. There's usually a preparatory meeting where officials go to that meeting and the agenda is worked out and positions taken and so on. That prep meeting for the meeting of the 23rd took place on the 15th. It's called the CAP. And nobody knows that more than Minister Moses, because he spent so many years at the OAS. Our officers also know that. In seeking to get to the bottom of this, we are now discovering that Trinidad and Tobago was absent from that meeting, unbeknownst to our headquarters. Trinidad and Tobago was absent from that meeting on the 15th of March. At that meeting, a unanimous decision was taken by all members of the OAS that they will support the waiver of Dominica, as requested by Dominica, to pay their dues. So that decision was taken on the 15th. On the 22nd of March, our officials were seeking guidance from Trinidad and Tobago as to how to respond to Dominica's request for a waiver. An issue that came up on the 15th of March, where Trinidad and Tobago was absent from the meeting, and of course, I am advised by these documents that headquarters was not advised that a unanimous decision was taken at that meeting to support Dominica. That decision taken on the 15th by OS is exactly in keeping with the position of Trinidad and Tobago at the UN through Minister Moses and at the donor conference through Representative Penny Beckles, as I read to you earlier on. So that was our position. That is our position. However, on the 22nd of March, and I have in the report a minute-by-minute arrangement of this 22nd and 23rd as to who did what and who said what. directions were sought from headquarters, and public officials started communicating Port of Spain and Washington. One of the concerns of the officials who were communicating was that if a waiver was granted to Dominica, the cost of Dominica's fees could have fallen onto Trinidad and Tobago, being another one of the CARICOM countries, an OAS member. It was determined at the meeting of the 15th that that will not be so. So there was no cost to us, even if Dominica was granted the waiver. So whether we agree or didn't agree, it wouldn't cost us anything. It was simply a procedural arrangement that Dominica would be allowed a bly for 2 years, 2018 and 2019, in making their financial contribution to the OAS. And that position was cleared on the 15th of March to be taken to the vote, to establish it by vote on the 23rd of March. On the 22nd of March, guidance was being sought in Trinidad, and of course, the officers there. So, part of my report, an actual statement coming from Washington, officials at Washington, given the explanations provided by our distinguished chair of the CAP, in the circumstances, the chair and distinguished colleagues, Trinidad and Tobago would wish to offer its express reservation, again here. So, somewhere, Trinidad and Tobago is now offering a reservation to that. How did that happen? Another one of my reports. This is from the Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary, saying, and he says, his position was that Trinidad and Tobago's position should remain consistent with those expressed at several meetings of CARICOM and the ACS with respect to the grant of waivers by him. This is the source of the problem. Public officials are now deciding that, notwithstanding what the political directorate may come to, the advice to, and the position of Trinidad and Tobago, is that we should maintain some consistency with some prior position somewhere else and some other matter. And to maintain that consistency, we must say no to the Dominica waiver. What they were referring to was an earlier meeting in February, I think, where there was a request by another CARICOM country for a waiver within CARICOM on a matter. And the CARICOM group took the position, including Trinidad and Tobago, that that waiver to that particular request should not be granted. Officials are now saying, in the Dominica situation, we should use that position and be consistent and say no to any and all waivers. And I may quote another line. It says, I am advised that on the 15th of March 2018, a meeting of the Committee of the Administrative and Budgetary Affairs of the OAS was convened to discuss inter alia the request from the Commonwealth of Dominica for a waiver of its financial contributions. At this meeting, it was agreed that all members would vote in favor of the waiver of the contributions to the OAS of 2018 and 2019. So persons in attendance of Trinidad and Tobago's business would have been eventually aware before Friday 23rd, 5 o'clock, that there was a position on the 15th of March at the OAS where all members agreed that a vote would be cast in favor of acceding to Dominica's request. Another one of my reports this one coming from the Permanent Secretary, because these officers were reporting to the Permanent Secretary and reporting back to Washington. The Permanent Secretary's report, having reviewed the above, which is the meeting schedules and so on, I indicated, agreed, this is the Permanent Secretary agreeing that the policy of Trinidad and Tobago should be changed to not should be consistent with something they did before over a request that was quite separate and apart. But we must change our position where Dominica waiver would now, we would reserve a support for that waiver. Agreed. And the Permanent Secretary goes on, and I'm quoting the Permanent Secretary in own report. However, I failed to forward the matter to the minister, as is the standard procedure, and as I am accustomed to on matters in respect of which an official position of Trinidad and Tobago is required. And of course, in the Permanent Secretary's report, Permanent Secretary acknowledges, on looking at the matter, including the meeting that was missed by Trinidad and Tobago on the 15th, it was therefore clear that there was consensus among the membership present at the reference meeting of the CAP to accede to Dominica's request for a waiver of its contributions to the OAS. This other report gives you the minute-by-minute arrangement of who said what, who did what, when, between headquarters and Washington. And this is the report of the minister himself to the Prime Minister. And I quote for you the minister's position because I wanted every officer, including the minister, to give me his or her position from their various locations. And it reads, within the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, there is an entrenched standard procedure to process requests from heads of mission of Trinidad and Tobago on the position to be adopted in international fora. On receipt, such requests are sent to the relevant division of the ministry for attention. The resulting output is ultimately sent to the Permanent Secretary, who submits it to the Minister of Foreign Affairs for consideration and authorization. Once the Foreign Minister approves the position, it is sent back to the Permanent Secretary for onward transmission to the mission concerned. In the case of the request by Trinidad and Tobago's Embassy, Washington, for guidance relative to the consideration by the Permanent Council of the OAS at its sitting on 23rd March 2018, it was processed by two divisions within the ministry. Consultations and a cooperative effort involving personnel from the Embassy, Washington, and the ministry resulted in a changed position from a recommendation from the Embassy, Washington, to support Dominica's request to another position, to one being proposed by the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry via the Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary. I was never consulted, nor was any submission made to me on this matter. I was not even aware that a request from Dominica for a waiver was to be considered by the Permanent Council, by the OAS on 22/2018. It is instructive that I was physically present in the ministry and had extensive discussions with the Permanent Secretary during the same period of 23rd March 2018 that the unauthorized position of Trinidad and Tobago was conveyed to the Embassy, Washington. Those are the facts. Those are the reports from the various locations in our station. And I have today taken the decision to send all of these reports and this situation for expert review by Ambassador Christopher Thomas, who is a very experienced Foreign Service officer who has represented Trinidad and Tobago as an accomplished diplomat at the highest level. He has had a long and distinguished career where he served as Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 1983 to 1985. He was Trinidad and Tobago's ambassador to Venezuela from 1985 to 1990 and was then elected as Assistant Secretary General to the OAS for 2 consecutive terms from 1990 to 2000. He was also an independent senator from 2001 to 2003, and he chaired a service commission, and he has also been an observer on election missions. Highly qualified national who I rely on to give me a more appropriate analysis of what we're dealing with here because it is my intention to let the facts dictate what actions are taken as Prime Minister on this matter. The second matter I want to touch on is the matter of Cambridge Analytica, where Trinidad and Tobago has been used as a basis for extending apparent criminal conduct around the world. There's evidence being collected outside of our jurisdiction that persons in Trinidad and Tobago and persons in the political arena and possibly in the government of Trinidad and Tobago worked with foreigners and entities based outside of Trinidad and Tobago to access information, private, personal, and protected by law, of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, invading their privacy in such a way that for persons who fell under that operation, all of their interaction with the internet, embarrassing or otherwise, but always personal, became raw material for the conduct of an election campaign in Trinidad and Tobago. It is our view that if that is confirmed, as witnesses are confirming abroad, then we in Trinidad and Tobago need to pay attention as to what laws, if any, were broken in Trinidad and Tobago, and who did what, where, when, and how, and to what extent taxpayer resources were used in this shenanigan. All I could say at this stage is that for those of us who were involved in election campaigns and elections, and those who were candidates or responsible for political entities and so on, have a window to this issue now, which is frightening. I recall, as opposition leader, coming under tremendous personal attacks, which only came clearer to me as the infractions and criminal conduct of Cambridge Analytica became available on international television, and their role in Trinidad and Tobago became admitted. The Attorney General spoke on this matter briefly. I can confirm that we are in touch with external entities under the mutual legal assistance treaties. And I have spoken today to the leader of government business in the House, and it is the intention of the government to bring this matter for parliamentary debate and ventilation at the earliest opportunity. I'm advised today by my colleagues who hold certain responsibilities that this matter will also form the basis of a thorough investigation by the Joint Select Committee of the Parliament, chaired by Minister Fitzgerald Hines, National Security Joint Select Committee, where persons, both local and foreign, can and will be summoned to explain their involvement in this scandal. If you have any questions, I'll take a few at this time. Yes, John.
Just wondering, so you had the reports, you say you're forwarding them to former ambassador.
The entire package, yes.
Right, so for review. What prevents you at this stage from taking any particular action on your own as opposed to seeking this advice?
Nothing prevents me. What other pertinent action that I can take, I will take.
From what you have read, Prime Minister, are you satisfied that the leadership at the ministry is functioning as it should, given the different reports you have received?
I am satisfied, and I'm also satisfied that you can only use the material that's available to you. And let me point, I know where you're heading, but let me just point out something to you. As I did mention early on, not for the first time, as head of the political directorate, I've had to deal with something like this, where persons have usurped the authority of the political executive. I may tell you, I have had to deal with a situation before as Prime Minister. The office, the only office that has the responsibility for determining who represents Trinidad and Tobago abroad, to wake up one morning and discover that such an authorization was given without reference to the Prime Minister, nor the Minister. Understand what I'm saying? So it is easy for you in the media to call for the Minister's head over my head as Prime Minister. But I like to deal with the facts. And I like to hold people accountable for their own actions.
So ideally speaking, just to follow up for clarity, Prime Minister, ideally, should this matter have gone to the Minister and then the Minister consult with you? Is that how it should have happened? I
outlined to you what the standard procedure is. I outlined to you the statement of the Permanent Secretary who acknowledges that this was the matter on the standard procedure should have been referred to the Minister, and that she failed to follow the usual procedure. If under those circumstances it would satisfy you that the Minister be fired, well then so be it on your corner. In my corner I stay with the facts.
Earlier you said nothing prevents you from taking action now, but you prefer to send the matter to the ambassador.
Because this requires, I'm sending it to the ambassador for review because it would require ensuring that we have in place any adjustments, any reviews, any improvements, any changes, so that this sort of thing doesn't happen again. We need to identify exactly how this could have happened and what exists in there that allows this to happen. So it requires a more critical eye with a more detailed drilling down.
This is for ensuring that that doesn't happen again, but the issue of holding someone accountable now.
Well, unlike the media, I'm not rushing against a deadline, a deadline of today, 4 o'clock in the evening to publish tomorrow, because I would take my time in dealing with this.
Have you had any conversation with the Prime Minister of Dominica concerning this issue?
We were in communication, but we didn't have a meeting. I sent a confirmatory text to my colleague in Dominica. But let me just say again, notwithstanding all of this in our bailiwick here in Trinidad and Tobago, the relationship between the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and Dominica and the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the government of Dominica and the wider CARICOM, that relationship is solid, if I may use the adjective chosen by the Prime Minister of Dominica. We don't have any problems in this matter. This was an unfortunate development in Trinidad and Tobago. We take ownership of it, and we will work towards ensuring that it doesn't happen again. But our unshakable commitment to CARICOM is there.
Can I ask, what access does a foreign representative have to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in circumstances where they may have reservations or be uncomfortable with an instruction that comes to them? If the person instinctively feels that this instruction is somehow awry and it's not in keeping with what would normally have happened, does that person have access to call the minister and say, listen, this isn't seeming right?
Of course. I mean, if an ambassador thinks that something doesn't read right, well then you need to go, not only as a minister, you can go above if you find that something is not reading right. But that doesn't mean that responsibilities, when you examine it in the way I'm examining it now, to determine exactly what happened, you see exactly what happened along the way.
Where exactly did this meeting that was missed on the 15th, I think it is, where was this meeting held? Was it in Washington, where the person
in Washington,
is actually posted?
In Washington.
So there would have been no reason. That what I'm trying to figure out is, if it is the meeting was held very far from where the person was stationed, is there any reasonable explanation that would explain why the person did not attend that meeting?
Well, it's not just the person. Trinidad and Tobago could be represented by a representative.
Yeah, well, whatever.
We were absent in total. I do not have that information at this point in time.
Do we know who was supposed to be the representative?
I know who our ambassador is. I know we have staff there at various levels, and any authorized person can represent Trinidad and Tobago at the meeting, and therefore the country is represented. What I'm only now discovering as we're looking into how this could have happened, how did this thing come about against the background of what we had been very clear on going forward. Because up until the 22nd of March, I know of no situation where Trinidad and Tobago would have been carrying that kind of thought about not supporting a request of this nature. But I'm seeing, as I pointed out to you, where it started by linking it to something else that happened at an earlier time with a different country. But even on that occasion, there was a unanimous CARICOM position which we were a part of then. So it was a consistency of position that was being looked for and maintained, which led us to not be inconsistent, wanting to stand with Dominica.
Prime Minister, I raised the question concerning any conversation you had with the Prime Minister of Dominica, because you were quoted as describing as fake news.
This is not, I don't want you to bring the government of Prime Minister Dominica into this matter. I'm dealing with Trinidad and Tobago's issue. This is our issue. It has nothing to do with the government of Dominica, except that they were surprised that we were recorded and demanded to be recorded as taking this position. However, you're talking about some meeting that I was supposed to have with the Prime Minister Dominica. I simply want to say to you all in the media, my observation. I'm not trying to tell you how to do your work, because I have my job to do and you have yours to do. But on more than one occasion, I have seen a difference between reporting the news, taking opinions on the news, and making the news. I, as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I was listening to the radio, and I heard a news item that I was scheduled to have a meeting with the Prime Minister of Dominica. And secondly, later in the day, there were members of the media asking me what transpired in the meeting and whether the meeting took place, something of which I had absolutely no knowledge, because there was never any meeting scheduled and there was never any meeting. So persons, I don't know where the creation came from, but it's not for me to chase down the source of something like that. I simply had to say that I know nothing about it, and therefore it was just a fabrication.
But
I must also say, I read the papers after that, and I saw in the media meeting and speaking being used interchangeably. And I was not fooled by that. If I was asked if I communicated with the Prime Minister of Dominica, the answer was yes. Are you all going to meet? The answer is no. I'm not aware of that. We said no meeting. Was there a meeting? The answer is no, because they are two separate things. But there are people who take it upon themselves in Trinidad and Tobago just to say anything and get it published.
Is anything being done, or can anything be done to rectify this country's position re that OAS vote? Is it that we can correct it, or it will remain as is?
Well, the vote has been taken. It forms part of the record of the OAS. So we can always come later on and say what our position is, and it means the second position will always be the latest. The same way this latest position changed our original commitment. But again, it is not for me to tell you how to handle it. It was a development which we would have rather not to have to deal with. And but I am confident that it will not damage our relationship. Our roots are too deep in CARICOM, and the government of which I was a part under Patrick Manning and which I'm leading now, our CARICOM colleagues and our CARICOM neighbors know exactly what we stand for and represent, whether it's Grenada, St. Vincent, Jamaica, you know. And may I say, while I'm on that those who appoint themselves advisors to the government as to how to conduct our foreign policy, the loudest voice is one called MP Rodney Charles. Our country has never been more embarrassed, than when a racist politician left France and went to New York seeking to run for the presidency of France and could not find a single country to stand with her as leader of the Nationalist Party of France. And the only country that stood with her and had lunch with her was Trinidad and Tobago. And the person who ate that lunch, to our shame, was one Rodney Charles, Member of Parliament today of Naparima, advising me now how to conduct the country's foreign affairs. And with respect to others, you may recall that it was this Prime Minister of this government that had to go to Jamaica and sit with 3/4 of the Jamaican cabinet to stave off a trade war because of unintended consequences. And of course, you know how we dealt with CARICOM with respect to whether we should pay any bills that they may have wanted help with. So Trinidad and Tobago must at all times ensure that we are leading in CARICOM, and we'll undertake so to do, as we share what little we have as the circumstances arise. And that is why in this government there is a Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, where CARICOM Affairs is treated as differently to the other foreign affairs.
Ask who is ultimately responsible for assigning someone to the office of Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
Prime Minister.
Is there any special training that person receives before?
No, persons come to positions by a variety of routes, and some element of training goes on and so on. But whether there's training or not, there are procedures, and that forms part of the training, the procedures to be followed. But a government is never in a good position when things happen where it has to rely and things didn't work out, and it appears as though you're wanting to blame the public service. This is not blaming. This is just establishing how did this happen, because I, like every other citizen, I spent the whole Easter weekend trying to find out how did this happen. And what I've shared with you today is how it happened.
No, I was asking in the context of the fact that ultimately one of the things you emphasized was that there was an acknowledgement that this position that seemed to be a reversal was not taken to the minister by the permanent secretary, and that was the sort of highest level at which the matter reached before it became public. So I just wanted to know if people who make these kinds of decisions have sufficient training to understand what are the implications and the
What I would say is that that's a good question. That's all I would say. That's a good question. But these things are usually not cast in stone, because if you don't want to kill initiative to say you must only move if this happens or if that happens, because if it becomes too rigid, then the pendulum swings in the other direction, and people become you get stasis. So what you want is an ability to act without act in a way, because again I'm not pronouncing incompetence, act in a way that you get the best that the circumstances allowed. And as you would have heard the Prime Minister of Dominica say, these things happen. And that statement annoyed some people here in Trinidad and Tobago, because it looked as if he was giving the government a bailout. But that was a statement of fact. But the bottom line is, you need to know what happened. Because rest assured that when these things happen, everyone sets out to cover themselves in it. And you could say, well, the buck stops with me as Prime Minister. I'm head of the government. It passed through the minister. We are responsible. But you have to ensure that the systems and that the personnel in the system give you the best option to avoid these things.
But I know there was that in the past, a number of permanent secretaries in that ministry have in fact come through the Foreign Service, and therefore have a certain built-in knowledge, institutional knowledge of what things how things are
Yeah, but
going.
I mean, we've had permanent secretaries going in and out of that ministry over time. And as a matter of fact, there was a permanent secretary there before and went out. This one came in and so on. But I don't know that that is the issue here. It was not a fog. It was. I think what stunned us more than anything else, it was that it was relatively easy to have been avoided, provided that the simple procedures were followed. Because I'm still waiting to find out why we were not represented at that meeting on the 15th. Because we do have more than one, right? I mean, I'm not even clear how large the team is up there, but I know we are represented there by people who are based there. So now that I'm looking into it in this way, to discover that, hey, the key meeting was on the 15th, where the decision was, the request was made there. The decision was taken there. It was unanimous there, and we were not there. So my question is, I am still to get that answer. Why weren't we there? And having not been there, look at what flowed out of it. We were not in a position to treat this as a mundane, routine matter. It became more than mundane and more than routine, much to the country's embarrassment.
So based on the presence of the Foreign Affairs Minister here and your earlier comments, you continue to hold confidence in the minister, continue to hold that confidence?
I have confidence in the foreign minister, otherwise you wouldn't be foreign minister. I saw one of my advisors in the media saying that he's foreign minister because he's my friend. I take that as a personal insult.
At the podium and fielding questions.
Last one.
What we've seen with the sea bridge, the air bridge and so on, passengers, some people saying they felt stranded in their own country and the airport and so on. Have you sought any report or clarification of what has been happening with this issue?
I am in constant communication with Cal, through the chairman and his staff out there, and with the Minister of Transport, and what is happening with respect to it. What we have is that is a moving target, right? Because you would have heard that Tobago was cut off. Tobago is marooned. Cal, over and above its own 4 or 5 ATRs that were in service, Cal chartered an additional plane to ensure that there was additional airlift available, because we knew that we were going to have to close the gap with the pulling out of the express. So Cal did that and made an additional 16,000 seats available, of which 13,000 were not utilized. Is it 3,000? 16,000, 3,000 were not utilized, 13,000 were utilized. So those people were in Tobago. Not all of them going to hotels. Many of them going back home, many of them going to guest houses or villas or friends and so on. So we improve what went on at Cal. But before that, I was hearing that there was no food in Tobago because Tobago was cut off from Trinidad. But of course, the cargo boat goes every day. And I'm in Tobago off and on, and I check for myself while I'm being told that Tobagoans were starving and they were hungry and there was no food. I check myself, and I discovered that all supermarkets in Tobago are well stocked. Even in their stores, they're well stocked. So that, then of course, we were there, in Tobago, myself and all those who got to Tobago, and it was time to come back to Trinidad. And of course, there's a large body of people wanting to come back to Trinidad in a short space of time, in that window at the end of Easter. So you had this large. And Cal performed admirably, I should say, in filling the breach at a time of difficulty. There's no gainsaying the fact that we are going through a very trying period with respect to our sea vessels. It has come to a head at this time, but it was coming. We've had 2 ferries that were being utilized non-stop to maintain the 2 ferry system, non-stop, without putting them in dry dock. My colleagues in the opposition who were in the government before me are now in the forefront trying to make political mileage out of this unfortunate development. But the vessels were supposed to have been maintained along the way. They were not maintained. If they are not maintained, they will lose their certification and you can't put them back in the water. So you ask for an extension and an extension and an extension till it got to the point where no more extension was required. One vessel went in for dry docking. I'm told, I'm not an engineer, I have to go by what I'm told by the agency responsible, that this was supposed to be a 6-week job. 9 months later, in the last 2 weeks, in my daily dealing with the minister, who is dealing with the board, and board dealing with the engineers and the repair crew, in the last 2 weeks, or shall I say the last 3 weeks, because leading up to Easter, I would have got changes with respect to the date of the spirit going into the water at least 6 times. A date is, since the 20th of February, that date sticks in my mind. Since the 20th of February, every single time I've inquired of those responsible, all the way down from through minister down to the port, when will the spirit come back? I get a confident date. The spirit will come back into Seabridge before Easter. It was my expectation that the spirit would have been in the water, certified for 5 years, because it's going through a comprehensive overhaul after a 9-month layoff, that the spirit will come back into the water, taking 900 passengers, running a ferry to Tobago. Unfortunately, the engineering to go with that could not and did not deliver. One day is the engine, next day is the radar, next day is the cable, the last thing is the generator. And you have to ask yourself, what system are we operating that generates this kind of outcome? And it's against that background that we're saying we now have taken a decision that the Express is not going to go through that system, as it now is on its way to dry dock. Simple as that. And it is not the kind of thing where we could say, okay, just pay some money and get it replaced. Vessels are not easily available on call like that. Had the process that threw up the Ocean Flower been successful, we would have had a passenger ferry in place. But you know what happened with the Ocean Flower. I need not mention any of that. That was the assignment of that delivered the Ocean Flower, which the port had to eventually turn down. And all that flowed from that. The government is on the job. I simply want to say to the people of Tobago, you have been long suffering. The government is not unmindful of it. It is our intention to end this comprehensively. I don't want to say anything about the spirit again, because until I see it in the water, certified and functioning, I'm not going to make any pronouncement on it. But I am still very hopeful that the new vessel that is due here will arrive somewhere around the time of delivery at the end of the month, would begin to bring relief to that service. In the meantime, the air bridge has worked remarkably well. We've got 4 or 5 planes running a shuttle to Tobago, so it is quite incorrect to say Tobago is cut off. They took a lot of people to Tobago, and this is that same lot of people who are in the news trying to get back to Trinidad, and the same problem. It can't be both. It can't be that nobody came and then they all had to come back to Trinidad. It is because they came while they're there in the airport to come back to Trinidad. So we don't have to overdo it. Right? We don't have to overdo it. And I'll tell you something else too. Of the 3,000 seats that were not used at CAL that we made, many of those seats might have been used. If the constant drone from some quarters is that, don't come to Tobago, because some people have taken it upon themselves to literally send that message. There's one or two people I could ask a simple question. You tell me one of your statements that you've made in the last year that would have had the effect of making anybody, Trinidadian or otherwise, choose Tobago as the place to go. But they don't like to hear that. But we are in the politics. We know that we are responsible, and of course there are persons who would like to score political points against our misfortune. Fine, but you don't have to overdo it. Because in overdoing it, you yourself might become the problem. The same way you are concerning yourself with the problem that Tobago is experiencing, your behavior might itself become the problem. Because when a person chooses to go on vacation, the last place you want to go is where the authority is telling you, it's a hellhole, don't come here. And then you complain. I was in Tobago at the Magdalena grounds, and that being the main hotel in Tobago, state-owned. I was there Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Not as a guest at the hotel, but as a guest at the grounds, at the golf course. And on every day I inquired what your occupancy was. And on every one of those days, the occupancy was above 50%. And by Sunday, the occupancy was 68%, that I was told. But yet, I'm hearing on the news by persons who appoint themselves spokespersons for Tobago, that Tobago has a 30% occupancy because things are so bad. Well, okay, that may be true where you are, but where I was, and there's another voice that could tell you that the Magdalena had an occupancy well above 30%. So it is what kind of climate, but I'm not going to focus on this. I'm focusing on getting the ferry service in place. We went out to rent a vessel, to lease a vessel. We found one that was available for sale. We took the decision to buy it because it was deemed by experts to be useful and value for money. So we know it will be that's on its way. I could tell you, I am convinced in my mind that that has upset some people. That we were able to buy a boat, to have a boat coming to affect that problem for the better. So yesterday I'm hearing in the Parliament, a member of Parliament, telling people that a boat that was bought 1 month after it finished its sea trial is an old boat. And out of the blue, a figure of $8 million is thrown out there as the value of the boat, and we paid $17 million for it. That is the kind of nonsense that goes on in Trinidad and Tobago. People who put themselves up as leaders. We paid $17 million, and he knows that it cost $8 million. We have been totally open and transparent on the purchase of that boat. We went out through brokers. We told the brokers, and we told the brokers, find us a vessel to meet our needs wherever that vessel is in the world. The brokers are out there looking for a vessel. One broker came back and said, there's this vessel that the Venezuelans were buying. They can't pay for it. You may want to look at it to see if it meets your needs. We did just that. And we did it through international quality assessments. And all I will say to my colleague, Senator Wade Mark, whatever you do, you will never succeed in weighing the PLM corn in your bushel. Corruption was the hallmark of the UNC government. I will ensure that it is not the hallmark of this government.
On a slightly separate note, do you agree with the position taken that the issue of a $150,000 settlement with a Ministry of Sport employee was a non-story? And
I don't know where that came from. I mean, I don't know whose words those were, but I'll tell you, I saw that in the media. I don't know whether that's, I am not one of those who say because it was in the papers and because the headlines say so, that's what was said, right? Words can be repackaged. I don't know, but I'm simply saying that matter came up as an urgent question in the Parliament. I have since myself, like you, would want to find out what are the facts surrounding it.
Do you have confidence in the Minister of Sport? As you express confidence in the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Do you have confidence in the Minister of Sport, given
to do the work of the Minister of Sport? Yes, I do. There's no minister in the government that I have no confidence in.
You have confidence in him as a member of your government, representing the values that you think your government would like to
no, that's a different question. What values are you talking about? Religious values, family values. Let us keep it a little tighter than that, you know. Let me end on this note. There's no minister who is holding a position in the government that the Prime Minister does not have confidence in. If I do not have confidence in an individual who I had given a portfolio to, I will withdraw that portfolio without let or hindrance.
Can I ask a policy question? The question of this, we have two instances, this last case and the Minister Dillon, about secret agreement, sort of like non-disclosure or confidential agreements. Now, there was a use in this particular case of the Sport Minister, taxpayers' money was being used for a non-disclosure. Is that a good policy on principle?
I just told you I am trying to find out what went on there. I first heard about it in the Parliament, described in legal terms as a legal action that took place in a court of law in Trinidad and Tobago. So I will not want to pronounce on it without knowing exactly what the details were. I am not one of those who start off by saying I don't know, but I can then continue the conversation as if I know.
Have you had a conversation with the Sports Minister about this?
What? You know something that I don't know? When I find out, I'll let you know. Because you keep talking about the Sports Minister. If you want to say something, say it. I'm saying I don't know. I first heard about it on, when was it? Wednesday. And rest assured, I will find out. And when I find out, I've been the most open Prime Minister on this podium.
So you would agree then that taxpayers' funds being used in a settlement, that there should be a certain measure of transparency?
I don't know what happened in the court. I don't know. If the court says that, didn't taxpayers' money pay $2 million after the coup for some action that the army took? It was taxpayers' money, but the court ruled that we had to pay. Until I know the details, I'm not going to engage this any further. When I know the details, I'm in a better position to engage you on it. But I'll tell you one thing. On the general principle of persons misconducting themselves at their workplace and being found guilty of wrongdoing, that is for their account. That's the general principle. And I'm not here speaking specifically to this matter because, as I said earlier, I don't know the details of this matter. I don't even know who was complaining about whom. So let me not go any further on it.
Second thing on the secret deal was Minister Dillon, the confidential agreement. This thing of the court, the U.S. court, sealing this property matter, sealing the verdict, but just giving a little half sentence while he's not guilty of wrongdoing. Does that deprive him of a chance to fully clear his name?
That is a matter for you and Minister Dillon. That's not a matter for me and this government. What I do know is that allegations are made against him, that he was involved in fraud and other unsavory matters, and I have now been told that in a court of law that has been found not to be truthful. And of course, how the U.S. court conduct its business is not a matter for me. Right? It was ventilated in a court of law under the jurisdiction of another country. It's a private and personal matter, and I don't know what else you want me to say.
U.S. Prime Minister, how were you first made aware of the matter concerning Minister Dillon?
It was published in the media. About the same time it was published, it was out there. It came, somebody sent me I'm hearing today that it was an ex parte submission to a court. So it was all in the public domain. Right.
Was it that the minister came to you and said that this is the situation?
No, the minister would have come to me at an earlier time indicating that he had personal business abroad to address involving an elderly person with whom he had some kind of relationship, and he asked for a weekend on a couple of occasions to deal with personal matters. This is normal. I granted personal approval, put an acting minister in place. I did not inquire into what the nature of the personal business was. So from that standpoint, I could say I knew he was going abroad to deal with personal business. When it came out as allegations of wrongdoing, that's a different story. And of course, it has gone the way that you know that I know. Thank you very much.